My name is Clara Sterling, and I sold my company Oralogic for $1.2 billion last year. But to truly understand how I ended up treading water in the pitch-black Pacific, you have to go back to the suburbs of Palo Alto, where the seeds of this toxic dynamic were first planted. There was me, Clara, the quiet, practical one. I had my head buried in books, then circuit boards, and eventually lines of code. And then there was Serena, my sister, 3 years my junior. Serena was pure, undeniable sunshine. She was gorgeous, effortlessly charming, and walked into a room like she owned it. I was the sturdy foundation. She was the dazzling marquee. Our parents, both dedicated but overwhelmed public school teachers, did their best to support us both, but the imbalance was palpable. When Serena nailed a solo in the school musical, they'd throw a party. The house would buzz with neighbors and praise. When I won the state-level robotics challenge, I'd get a respectful nod and a, "That's wonderful, dear. Now, can you help Serena with her college application essay?" They loved me, I know they did, but they understood Serena. She spoke the language of social grace and immediate validation, a language they were fluent in. My language, the logic gates and the future tense of AI, was foreign to them. I learned early on that attention wasn't earned through achievement. It was commanded through charisma. And since I had none of the latter, I doubled down on the former. My sanctuary wasn't the crowded, loving chaos of our kitchen. It was the dimly lit corner of our basement where our first clunky PC sat humming. I was 12 when I stumbled onto coding, and it felt like finding the cheat code to life. For the first time, I felt powerful, seeing cause and effect in perfect, beautiful clarity. I had one major champion, though, Mrs. Peterson, my high school computer science teacher. She saw past the quiet kid in the oversized hoodie. "Clara," she told me once, tracing a complex algorithm on the whiteboard, "you have a gift. Your mind operates on a different frequency. Never let anyone tell you to turn it down." That simple affirmation, a gold nugget of validation, fueled me through years of doubt. It was her voice that whispered over the hum of the servers when I was trying to find funding years later. But escaping Serena's shadow and my parents' subtle favoritism wasn't cheap or easy, even in the heart of Silicon Valley. I earned a partial scholarship to State University, but to cover the rest of the tuition, room and board, I worked. I didn't work one job, I worked 3. I waited tables from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., attended classes, then coded freelance for small startups until 10 p.m. Sleep was a luxury I simply couldn't afford. It was during those grueling, caffeine-fueled nights that the core idea for Oralogic took shape. I was studying human-computer interaction, and I realized that while we were getting great at tracking what users did, we had no idea how they felt about it. I started developing an AI algorithm that could interpret subtle emotional cues, the timing of a keystroke, the hesitation before a click, the language patterns in digital communication, to build a nuanced emotional profile. I called it an emotional intelligence layer, and the first use case I targeted was detecting early signs of depression and anxiety in digital communication. This wasn't just a program, it was a lifeboat. When I finally launched Oralogic right after graduation, I was met with skepticism. A 23-year-old woman with no business degree selling feelings. One venture capitalist laughed into his latte. But the algorithm didn't care about his sexism or my lack of a Wharton MBA. It just worked. And when a major healthcare provider ran her pilot and saw a 30% increase in early-stage mental health interventions, the money finally started flowing. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own family was suddenly on the cover of Forbes. Success, however, brings a new kind of visibility, the kind that attracts predators. I was exhausted, successful, and deeply, fundamentally lonely. And that's precisely when Alastair Vance, a charming, charismatic venture capitalist with a tailored suit and a smile that could melt glaciers, walked into my life. He didn't just see the CEO, he seemed to genuinely see Clara. He told me that my work was revolutionary, that I was brilliant, and that I was the most beautiful mind he'd ever met. Alastair pursued me relentlessly. He flew me to Monaco, sent me personalized gifts, and spoke to me about our future empire with such conviction that I finally let my guard down. He was the perfect balm for a lifetime of feeling overlooked. He wasn't just attracted to my success, he was attracted to me, or so I thought. We were married 8 months later in a stunning ceremony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Ironically, the very body of water that would soon become my tomb. Serena, radiant and tearful, stood as my maid of honor, declaring how proud she was of her brilliant big sister. Looking back, I can still hear the sincerity in her voice, but now I recognize it for what it truly was, a flawless performance. The stage was set, the foundation was poured, and the whole magnificent edifice of my life was about to be deliberately, ruthlessly demolished. The sale to Omnicorp for $1.2 billion closed shortly after the wedding, making me an instant icon and, more importantly, a target. I was no longer just Clara Sterling. I was the gold standard, and every predator in the ecosystem knew my market value. And yet, as I stood there on the precipice of unimaginable wealth and what I believed was true love, I felt a slight, chilling tremor, the first glitch in the seemingly perfect code of my new life. It was a tremor I dismissed as nerves, but it was the sound of the trap snapping shut. The honeymoon phase, they call it. For me, it felt more like a transition into a gilded cage. After the Omnicorp acquisition, the papers hailed me as a visionary, the billion-dollar brain. Life with Alastair Vance, my handsome, perpetually attentive husband, should have been a fairy tale ending. But fairy tales never account for the subtle, unsettling shift in the atmosphere when money replaces genuine connection as the primary currency. The problems weren't immediately obvious, and that's what made them so insidious. 6 months post-acquisition, and roughly 18 months into our marriage, the man who had once hung on my every word was now frequently indisposed. His charm, once focused entirely on me, was now a generalized, distant radiance he wore for the world. He became obsessed with protecting our shared finances, a role he naturally assumed as the seasoned venture capitalist. Every conversation about money felt like an interrogation disguised as a strategy session. I chalked it up to the pressures of sudden wealth. $1 billion changes people, even the good ones. But then Serena started showing up. My sister, Serena, the one who had always kept me at arm's length unless she needed a ride or a contact, was suddenly a constant fixture at our sprawling Malibu estate. She claimed to be supporting me through the stress of transitioning from CEO to board member, but her presence was unnerving. She and Alastair had a silent, easy camaraderie that went beyond in-laws. They'd share knowing glances over the dinner table, an inside joke I never understood, or an immediate, shared dismissal of something I had just said. It was like watching a play written for two, with me in the role of the bemused, wealthy audience member. One evening, I walked into Alastair's home office, a space I rarely entered. I preferred my own minimalist workspace to find them huddled over a tablet. The screen displayed a complex financial modeling spreadsheet. Alastair slammed the tablet shut a little too quickly. Serena, usually an expert at recovery, jumped slightly and plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Clara, Didn't hear you come in, Alistair said, his voice a little too loud. Just showing Serena some new investment opportunities. She's surprisingly savvy with global markets. Serena quickly chimed in. Yeah, I'm trying to set up a little nest egg in Europe. Alistair's been helping me understand the logistics of international wire transfers. It's confusing stuff, all those compliance limits and tax treaties. They were talking about millions. Serena, who had barely held a job for more than 6 months and was living off an allowance I'd set up, talking about global markets and compliance limits. A sliver of ice formed in my gut. I am a technologist, a pattern recognition expert. My brain is literally wired to spot anomalies, to find the bug in the system. And the system called my marriage and family had more bugs than a pre-release beta. I began checking the digital paper trail. Discreetly, my old habits kicked in. I didn't confront them, I analyzed. I ran deep dives on Alistair's publicly available financials. What I found wasn't just unsettling, it was a red flag the size of Texas. The polished facade of the respected VC concealed a history of catastrophic gambling debt, 2 corporate bankruptcies that were mysteriously swept under the rug, and a habit of marrying significantly older, wealthier women who had met with unfortunate accidents. The real shocker, however, involved Serena. Through an encrypted channel, I accessed the global banking records she had mentioned. The little nest egg wasn't little. It was a series of large, anonymous transfers funneling into accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, totaling nearly $8 million. Money I had given her over the years, not for investment, but out of sisterly obligation. She was moving mountains of cash, and Alistair was the architect. I knew, deep down, that the time for polite inquiry was over. This wasn't about infidelity. This was about something far darker. I needed professional help, the kind that dealt in cold, hard facts, not emotional suspicion. I reached out to a former security contact from my orologic days, who immediately recommended a private investigator named Marcus Dunn. Marcus was a former FBI financial crimes specialist with a face like granite and an approach just as hard. I met him in a secluded office building in downtown LA, bypassing Alistair's security network to ensure our meeting was invisible. I laid out the whole story, the quick marriage, the sudden wealth, the change in Alistair, and the disturbing intimacy with Serena. Marcus confirmed my worst fears. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his eyes scanning the data, "Mr. Vance is a professional predator. He selects targets who are newly wealthy, perhaps emotionally isolated, and who have a clear, uncomplicated line of inheritance." He paused, delivering the final, crushing blow. "And your sister, Serena, appears to be his active accomplice, not just an in-law who got too close. They are executing a shared financial strategy." The sting wasn't just the betrayal by my husband. It was the realization that my own sister had been plotting against me since the moment I first became a mark. All those years of feeling second best had apparently festered into a calculated, lethal envy. The final piece of the puzzle, the most terrifying piece, came when I installed covert cameras in the estates and used storage wing, linked to an emergency satellite uplink. It was a desperate Hail Mary move. The footage, retrieved the very next day, left no room for doubt. The screen showed Alistair and Serena, not in a romantic embrace, but leaning over a blueprint of our new yacht, the Zenith. Alistair pointed to a spot near the aft deck. "The sedative will hit her about 2 a.m. Deep water, no witnesses, no signal. We push her here. The current will do the rest." Serena smiled, a cold, empty expression that wiped away every trace of the bright, loving sister I thought I knew. Just make sure my name is ironclad on that last revision, Alistair. I don't want any messy probate fighting a ghost. The plan was concrete. A forthcoming luxury cruise, deep water, and a simple push. And they knew the inheritance laws cold. With no children, and my recent update placing Serena as the sole secondary heir after Alistair, they stood to gain everything. The only bug in their program was that the supposed victim was a master of anticipating system failure. The game had just changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about counter-strategy. The moment the video footage confirmed the murder plot, something inside me fractured, then instantly hardened. The emotional agony of seeing my husband and my sister plotting my demise was overwhelming, but the programmer in me took over. Emotion is a vulnerability. Logic is a weapon. They thought they were dealing with a heartbroken wife. They were now dealing with the architect of orologic, a mind designed to find the flaw in any system. The first step was to acknowledge the parameters of the problem. A closed environment, the zenith, 2 highly motivated killers, and a fixed timeline. The upcoming luxury cruise to the South Pacific. My primary goal shifted from exposing them to surviving them, then punishing them. I had to play the part. I became the blissfully ignorant, slightly naive Clara they expected. I listened to Alistair rave about the upcoming romantic adventure, and even allowed Serena to come over and help me pack the perfect vacation wardrobe. Watching Serena fold my clothes, knowing she was mentally folding a burial shroud, was a masterclass in psychological torture for both of us, but I endured it, absorbing details. The first crucial countermeasure was financial. Alistair thought he controlled every account, but he overlooked the complex, multi-layered financial structures I'd built during the OmniCorp negotiation, my own contingency plan for protecting my intellectual property. Over a series of highly secure, encrypted transactions, disguised as routine investment transfers and charitable pledges, I moved a substantial sum, $10 million of completely untraceable, liquid cash into a ghost account held by a shell company in the Netherlands Antilles. It was a safety net, an emergency fund for a new life, and a war chest for the inevitable legal battle. Next came the communication protocol. I called my loyal executive assistant, Chloe, a woman whose discretion had been tested and proven during the chaotic early days of orologic. I didn't tell her the whole truth. I couldn't risk the anxiety showing on her face, but I told her enough to set the legal traps. "Chloe," I said during a clandestine lunch meeting in an anonymous hotel suite, "I'm going on this cruise and I have a bad feeling, a very bad feeling. I need you to execute Protocol Chimera if I don't check in on day 8. Protocol Chimera was a sealed, notarized set of instructions. It detailed the exact steps Chloe needed to take. Contact my lawyer, Elias Thorne, immediately. Provide him with the location of the backup server containing all my premarital financial data and a digital copy of the murder footage. Most importantly, it contained a legally executed power of attorney, granting Elias control over the bulk of my liquid assets, placing them outside Alistair's immediate reach, and attaching a devastating codicil to that would nullify all inheritance claims if a criminal investigation was initiated within 6 months of my death. This was the dagger aimed directly at their motive. "And Chloe," I added, looking her directly in the eye, "if anything happens to me, you go dark. Don't trust anyone. You are the key to bringing them down." Chloe, bless her pragmatic soul, just nodded, treating it like any other high-stakes corporate maneuver. "Understood, Ms. Sterling. Day 8. I will ensure the system is operational." My final preparations involved the personal survival kit, The zenith was luxurious, but it was far from shore. I knew their timing would be precise. Deep water, maximum distance from commercial shipping lanes. My tech background offered a bizarre advantage here. I purchased a high-end, military-grade satellite messenger and GPS beacon disguised as an emergency medical alert necklace. I found a durable, waterproof pouch and stuffed it with a few $100s in various currencies, a waterproof phone case with a fully charged satellite phone, and a small, concentrated first aid kit. I hid this pouch beneath the lining of a ridiculously large, ostentatious sun hat that Serena had actually insisted I pack, a final, ironic layer of camouflage. The night before the departure, Alistair toasted me with expensive champagne. "To us, my love," he murmured, his eyes full of that familiar, manufactured warmth. A new beginning. Serena was there, too, helping us organize the final luggage. She gave me a hug, a little tighter than usual, and whispered, "Have the best trip, Clara. You deserve it." That night, lying next to Alistair, I felt an eerie calm. Fear was still a humming undercurrent, but it was drowned out by the intense focus of the mission. I was preparing for a final exam where the penalty for failure was death. I visualized the moment, the sedative hitting, my reaction time, the timing of the struggle, and the point of entry into the water. Every variable was accounted for. My mind kept returning to my old mentor, Mrs. Peterson. Her lesson wasn't just about code. It was about building resilience. She taught me to always include a contingency loop, an error trap, a catch block for unexpected failure. Alistair and Serena were about to walk into the catch block I had engineered. When we boarded the Zenith, a magnificent three-deck monument to my success, I smiled broadly. I posed for the obligatory social media photos, the ones that would later be used as evidence of my final, blissful moments. I wore the large sun hat and kept the emergency pouch securely zipped inside my beach bag. The first few days were a blur of gourmet meals, private jacuzzis, and forced intimacy. We sailed smoothly out of the San Diego harbor, past the glittering lights of the California coast, and into the endless blue. Each mile away from shore felt like another turn of the screw. I knew the operation would begin on the night we were furthest out, the night the vast emptiness of the Pacific would become their silent accomplice. On day 4, Alistair suggested a special toast for the most successful woman he knew. I looked into his eyes, the eyes that had once promised forever, and saw only a cold, predatory hunger. The trap was sprung. I just had to make sure I was the one who survived it. The sea was ink black, a churning void under a sliver of moon. It was the 5th night, precisely as my calculations predicted, and the Zenith was a solitary speck, far beyond the reach of any recognizable shipping lane or coastal signal. The vastness of the Pacific felt less like a romantic backdrop and more like a massive, hungry waiting room. Alistair, playing the attentive husband one last time, suggested a final nightcap on the aft deck. He poured 2 glasses of a rare amber single malt, my favorite. He handed me mine with that practiced, dazzling smile. "To us, Clara. To the future we're finally going to build." I accepted the glass, my hand steady despite the adrenaline roaring through my veins. The air was thick with the scent of salt and deceit. I took a deliberate, visible sip, letting Alistair believe the mission was accomplished. The sedative, a powerful benzodiazepine, I recognized the faint, bitter undertone, was already burning its way through the cocktail. My counterplan, rehearsed meticulously in my mind, was simple: delay the effect. I held the liquid in my mouth, swishing it only slightly, then spat the majority of the mixture over the railing, disguised as a cough, a brief, dramatic gesture of choking. I swallowed only a minimal, calculated dose. Enough to induce the initial grogginess they expected, but not enough to render me fully incapacitated. Within minutes, the drug began its work. The sleek lines of the yacht softened, the deck lights blurred into halos, and my limbs felt heavy-weighted. I stumbled dramatically. "Alistair," I slurred, allowing my head to loll against his shoulder. "I think I'm feeling a little seasick." He was instantly, chillingly solicitous. "Of course, my love. Too much sun today." He helped me into the stateroom, tucked me into the expansive bed, and gave me a kiss on the forehead, the ultimate Judas kiss. "Sleep well, darling. I'll check on you in a couple of hours." I timed my descent into feigned unconsciousness perfectly. My breathing slowed, my heart rate dropped, and my body went slack, the picture of a woman rendered harmless. I lay there, listening to the cabin door click shut, every nerve ending screaming. This was the hardest part, the wait. It felt like an eternity, but it was only 90 minutes later, the estimated peak of the drug's effectiveness, that the door hissed open again. They entered together, not creeping, but with the casual confidence of people performing a mundane, necessary chore. Alistair carried a large, heavy duffel bag. Serena carried the look of cold, calculating anticipation. "She's out cold," Serena whispered, her voice laced with an eager, cruel satisfaction I'd never heard before. "Did you see her face when she drank it? Pathetic." Alistair walked over and checked my pulse, a quick, dismissive gesture. "Too easy, Serena. You were right. The billion made her stupid. The second she thought I loved her for more than the money, the program failed. That was the trigger." Hearing him confirm the transactional nature of his pursuit was a deeper stab than the physical danger. Serena chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "She always was so damn serious, Alistair. Always coding, always working. And Mom and Dad always had this respect for her, this quiet pride, even if they didn't understand it. Now she finally gets to be invisible, just like she always was." They walked me through the last 6 months, oblivious to the fact that their victim was recording every word. They confirmed the full timeline. Alistair reached out to Serena before the wedding, knowing my will was newly updated and placing Serena as a critical link. They discussed how they would frame the will as an unfortunate tragedy and how the insurance payouts would set them up for life in the Mediterranean. But as Alistair reached down to begin wrapping me in the heavy plastic sheeting from the duffel bag, the final, sickening detail, I acted. My eyes snapped open. I moved with the sudden, frantic energy of an animal cornered, fueled by months of banked fury and adrenaline. I lunged up, shouting his name, a raw, animal sound of betrayal. "Alistair! Serena! You monsters!" The shock on their faces was priceless. Alistair recoiled, dropping the duffel bag with a clatter. Serena screamed, a sharp, unglamorous sound that cut through the silence of the sea. Alistair recovered first. His charming mask evaporated, replaced by the face of pure, predatory rage. "You little witch! You knew! How did you know?" He lunged at me, but the small dose of sedative made me clumsy. I scrambled out of bed and toward the door, but Serena was faster. She tackled me, and we crashed onto the teak deck of the stateroom. It was a messy, brutal fight, not the stylized confrontation of an action movie, but a desperate, thrashing struggle fueled by desperation and betrayal. We struggled out onto the dark aft deck. The wind whipped our hair, and the yacht's engines were a distant thrumming. Alistair was shouting, his voice echoing off the water. "Stop her! We have to finish this now." Serena had me pinned against the low railing. I saw the pure, cold hatred in her eyes, a lifetime of simmering resentment boiling over into murderous intent. She leaned in, her mouth close to my ear, and whispered the line that would haunt me forever, the one that proved she felt no humanity whatsoever. "Say hello to the sharks for me, Clara!" she hissed, using my childhood nickname with vicious contempt. With a final, adrenaline-fueled heave, she leveraged her weight and shoved me over the railing. I plummeted backward into the churning, black nothingness of the Pacific Ocean. The last image I saw, etched forever behind my eyelids, was Alistair standing over the railing, his face contorted not with panic or regret, but with a satisfied, triumphant smile. Then the icy shock of the water swallowed me whole. The ship's lights receded almost instantly, leaving me alone in the crushing darkness, declared dead by the two people who were supposed to love me most. My survival plan was now officially in stage 2, exfiltration. The initial shock of the Pacific water was a physical blow, a sudden, incapacitating cold that stole the air from my lungs. It was an instant reset, a violent baptism into a new reality. The salt water burned my eyes, but the cold was my ally. It fought off the residual effects of the sedative, sharpening the edges of my panic. I was underwater for what felt like an eternity, the sound of the zenith's receding engines, a fading hum. When I finally surfaced, gasping, the yacht was already a ghostly, dwindling light on the horizon. They hadn't even checked to see if I was dead. They assumed the cold, the dark, and the depth had done their work. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the primal rage of being discarded. My training kicked in. My mind, the one Alistair had called stupid for believing in love, became a focused laser. Rule 1, conserve energy. I didn't swim towards the boat. I knew I couldn't catch it. I focused on controlling my breathing, switching immediately to a slow, methodical backstroke. The waterproof pouch, the one I'd hidden in the ridiculous sun hat, was my lifeline. It had a small clip, and I'd secured it to the zipper of my dress seconds before the fall. I fumbled for it, my fingers numb, and finally extracted the GPS beacon. I activated it with a single, deliberate press. It was a faint signal, military grade, designed to pierce atmospheric noise, but it was transmitting. I had marked the area on my emergency map, deep water, but on the edge of a known fishing current leading toward the Baja Peninsula. It was a gamble, but it was the only bet I had left. The next 18 hours were a testament to the sheer, stubborn will to live. Time dissolved into a pattern of cold, waves, and pain. I used my knowledge of ocean currents, remembering old surfing lessons from my 20s, to ride the large swells rather than fight them. I spoke to myself constantly, repeating my core motivation: Alistair and Serena must not win. I will not be a footnote in their stolen lives. I thought about my parents, and the pain was a new wave of nausea. Did their favoritism of Serena make this easier for her? Did they, in some subconscious way, teach her that my achievements were merely currency to be spent? This wasn't the time for philosophy, but the betrayal was fuel. Every time a muscle cramped, I pictured Alistair's satisfied smile and Serena's cruel whisper, and the cold vanished, replaced by a searing determination. Just as the sun began its brutal ascent on the second day, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for my grim situation, I saw it, a small, weathered fishing trawler, its hull scarred by years of battling the Pacific. It was heading almost directly toward my position. The GPS beacon had done its job. I used the last reserves of my strength to wave, to shout, my voice hoarse from the salt and cold. The boat, named the Seafarer, finally turned. A weathered, kind-faced man in his late 60s, Captain Ricardo, and his young, sharp-eyed son, Benito, hauled me aboard. I collapsed onto the deck, shivering uncontrollably, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of diesel and fish. It was the most glorious scent I had ever encountered. Captain Ricardo gave me hot broth and a heavy woolen jacket. "What happened, señorita? You were so far out." I knew I couldn't tell them the whole truth. If Alastair and Serena had succeeded, they would have the world looking for me, or at least looking for my body. If I was officially pronounced dead, the legal and financial traps I had set would snap shut. My survival had to remain a secret weapon. I concocted a story on the spot. It was a nightmare, Captain. My husband and I were fighting a huge argument. He was drinking, and in a fit of rage, he pushed me off the railing. I hit the water, and he just kept going. I managed to grab this emergency device. I kept the story focused on a crime of passion, a momentary lapse, not a planned murder plot. I opened the waterproof pouch, pulling out the wad of cash. "Captain Ricardo, I need a favor that will change your life. I need you to drop me off at the quietest, most secluded fishing village you know, somewhere in Baja, where there is no U.S. presence. No names, no questions, no authorities. I need to disappear for a while to figure out how to deal with this." I offered them a sum that was more than they made in 5 years of fishing. Ricardo looked at the money, then at Benito, then back at me. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes, the sheer terror beneath the wealthy veneer, and perhaps the truth of the danger I was in. He made his choice. "We are only fishers, señorita. No police. We will take you to Ensenada, the quiet part. We never saw you." I finally allowed myself to cry, a brief, silent, grateful outpouring of relief. I contacted Chloe via the satellite phone. The connection was scratchy, but the message was clear. "I am safe. Do not contact me again. Initiate protocol chimera on day 8 as planned. I am officially dead. Do not deviate." "Chloe, ever the professional," simply replied, "Message received, Miss Sterling. Godspeed." As the Seafarer made its long, slow journey back to shore, I looked out at the ocean. It hadn't claimed me. It had protected me. I was officially a ghost, a financial specter, and Alastair and Serena were celebrating their supposed victory. They had won the battle, but I, Clara Sterling, was about to start the war. And the best advantage in any war is a truly effective disguise. The seaside village of San Miguel, a quiet, sun-baked stretch of Baja California, became my improbable sanctuary. Captain Ricardo and Benito were true to their word. Dropping me off before dawn, I settled into a small, nondescript casita, operating under the alias Patricia Lane. The $10 million was securely held, but the few thousand I had with me were enough to buy me time and, more importantly, silence. I spent the first few days in a fog of physical recovery and psychological reprocessing. The near-death experience had stripped away the superficial layers of my former life. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple cotton. The high-tech existence was reduced to a burner phone and a clandestine Wi-Fi connection at a local cafe. I was a billionaire living like a backpacker, and the anonymity was strangely liberating. It was time to build my Counter-Strike team. A ghost needs a voice, a ghost needs muscle, and a ghost needs a lawyer with teeth. First, I contacted Elias Thorne, my corporate attorney. Elias was a legend in Silicon Valley, old school, impeccably dressed, and possessing a moral compass as sharp as his legal mind. I contacted him using a voice modulator and an encrypted channel, delivering a precise set of passphrase only he would recognize. "Elias," I said, my voice sounding deep and mechanical. "It's Clara. I'm alive, but I need you to proceed as if I am dead until further notice. Protocol Chimera is active. Alistair and Serena are murderers, and the game is for all the marbles." Elias was momentarily stunned, but his professionalism quickly took over. "My God, Clara, I understand. I will secure the assets and begin the initial litigation quietly. No public statements. I'll need the digital evidence soon. Where should I dispatch Maya?" Maya Singh, the second recruit, was my former chief security officer at Oralogic and Elias's recommendation for the tech side. Maya was a cyberforensics prodigy who could resurrect data thought to be permanently erased. She was dispatched to a discreet meeting point in Tijuana, where I sent her the external drive containing the surveillance footage from the Zenith and all my original prenuptial data backups. Maya's findings were swift and devastating. Within a week, she confirmed that the surveillance video was authentic and tamper-proof. More importantly, she retrieved the deleted communications from Alistair's and Serena's encrypted apps, dating back over a year. "Clara," Maya reported back, her voice tight with professional anger, "this isn't just a recent plot. Alistair initiated contact with Serena 6 weeks before he even met you. He saw your name on an investment prospectus, looked up your family, and saw Serena, the easily corruptible one, as the perfect insider. They were planning the inheritance strategy before the first date. The full scope of the betrayal hit me then. The entire marriage, every romantic gesture, every shared dream, had been a meticulously planned, theatrical production. I wasn't married for love. I was married for a $1.2 billion exit strategy. The knowledge was a powerful antidote to any lingering sentimentality. The final piece was Marcus Dunn, the private investigator. I tasked Marcus with a deeper dive into Alistair's past. I needed to establish a pattern of predatory behavior, the kind of evidence that moves a case from complex financial fraud to premeditated murder. Marcus didn't disappoint. He uncovered 2 prior accidents involving women Alistair had married and quickly lost. A tragic hiking fall in the Rockies and an apparent overdose in an upstate New York apartment. Both women were wealthy. Both had recently updated their wills in Alistair's favor, and both cases were quietly closed as accidents. "He's a black widow, Clara," Marcus concluded. "A serial offender. He's refined his method with you, using the yacht to guarantee no body, no crime. But the motive is identical. With this irrefutable mountain of evidence, the video, the emails, the 2 previous suspicious deaths, Elias Thorne was ready to mobilize. While the world mourned the tragic loss of Clara Sterling, the CEO, the legal team was coordinating with the FBI and the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Unit. We were preparing a case that would not just put Alistair and Serena in jail, but would also ensure their financial ruin was absolute. Meanwhile, Chloe, playing the grieving but resilient assistant, was in California, managing the outward-facing operation. She was the perfect, trustworthy mole, giving Alistair and Serena the space to fully savor their ill-gotten gains. Alistair, now the presumptive heir, was holding tearful press conferences, looking every bit the distraught widower, his face a perfect picture of sorrow. Serena, standing beside him, looked appropriately solemn. They were celebrating their victory, confident that the deep Pacific had ensured their silence. I watched the news reports from my small, dusty television in San Miguel. Seeing Alistair wipe away a dry tear, hearing Serena's hollow condolences, was sickening, yet it galvanized me. This was the moment I stopped being the victim and started being the architect of their downfall. I realized that true resilience wasn't surviving the fall. It was having the strength and wisdom to choose my own ending. The ghost was about to pay a visit. 3 months is a long time to be a ghost. In the financial world, it's just enough time for the predators to relax, to start believing the bait has been swallowed whole. Alistair and Serena had settled into my Malibu estate, living the high life on what they believed was their inheritance, my money. Alistair was giving interviews about launching a charitable foundation in my name, a disgusting public relations maneuver, while Serena was busy posting thinly veiled grief, photos featuring my designer wardrobe and my infinity pool. But while they were savoring my death, I was busy perfecting my rebirth. My team, the Ghost Contingency, had prepared the stage. Maya had secured the house's internal network, ensuring that all our surveillance and communication would be invisible. Marcus had coordinated with the local police and the FBI field office, ensuring that the warrants for murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud were signed, sealed, and ready for execution. Elias had locked down the assets, placing a global freeze on nearly all of Alistair's accounts, a fact Alistair was about to discover the hard way. I arrived in Los Angeles under the cover of a heavily disguised private jet, using a set of highly secure documents prepared by Elias. Gone was the polished, slightly anxious CEO. I was leaner, my hair was cut differently, and my eyes, though still Clara Sterling's eyes, held a fierce, unblinking clarity that had been absent before. I wasn't just surviving, I was radiating intent. The first stop was my home, the home they had desecrated. Chloe had been the key, installing subtle, almost invisible upgrades. She'd reactivated a redundant security door in the basement that Alistair, with his arrogance, had never bothered to decommission. I slipped into the house in the middle of the afternoon. The air inside felt heavy with a false sense of luxury and their self-congratulation. I walked through the rooms, noting the small, infuriating changes. Serena's cheap, gaudy art replacing my subtle collection. Alistair's cigars left carelessly on my antique desk. It fueled my resolve. My grand, final confrontation needed to be perfect, a theatrical moment designed not for revenge, but for evidence and psychological shock. I chose the dining room, a long mahogany table where we'd hosted so many dinner parties. The very table where I had first noticed their shared, knowing glances. I set the table for 3. Crystal glasses, my finest china, and a single, meticulously wrapped gift box placed at the head of the table, centered on the most expensive place setting. The box was tied with a simple black ribbon. I then retreated to the master stateroom where I waited. The FBI and police units, informed of the precise time of my planned confrontation, were positioned discreetly outside the perimeter, ready to move in on my signal. Marcus and 2 of his security team members were hidden in a converted panic room adjacent to the dining area, ready to intervene if the situation turned violent, a probability that Marcus rated as near certain. Alistair and Serena had been on a whirlwind shopping spree in Paris, using my money to celebrate their success. Chloe, monitoring their travel, confirmed their arrival time at LAX. At 7 p.m., I heard the crunch of their luxury SUV tires on the gravel driveway. Their voices drifted up the stairs, Serena laughing about a ridiculous purchase, Alistair complaining about the jet lag. They were buoyant, victorious, and completely unprepared for the reality that was waiting for them. I positioned myself at the far end of the long dining room, standing perfectly still, bathed in the soft, theatrical glow of the chandelier. They walked in, still talking, Serena kicking off her new Jimmy Choos, Alistair loosening his tie. Alistair glanced at the table, stopped mid-sentence and frowned. "Who set the table for 3?" he muttered, looking around. "Did Chloe mess up?" "I told her we were ordering takeout tonight." Serena's eyes darted to the ominous gift box, then up to the head of the table where I stood. The smile froze on her face. Alistair followed her gaze. His jaw dropped. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. His initial look wasn't fear. It was profound, absolute, uncomprehending shock. He was staring at a ghost. I broke the silence, my voice low, clear, and steady, utterly devoid of the warmth they had once exploited. "Hello, Alistair." "Hello, Serena," I said, my hands resting lightly on the back of the chair. "Welcome home. I thought we should have a little dinner. A family reunion, so to speak. It's been far too long since I've seen my 2 favorite traders." Alistair stammered, his eyes wide and vacant. "Clara, that's impossible. You're dead. We saw." "You saw what you wanted to see," I interrupted, cutting him off with the precision of a guillotine. "You saw the result of your pathetic, greedy calculation. But you failed to calculate the error margin for my resilience. You forgot the first rule of engineering. Always test the system before you deploy. You deployed a faulty murder plot." Serena, despite the terror in her eyes, finally found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate plea. "Clara, please, it was an accident. He pushed you. I tried to stop him." I shook my head slowly, smiling, a cold, genuine smile of triumph. "No, Serena, it wasn't an accident, and I remember every word you said. I remember what you whispered to me just before you pushed." The game was on. Their carefully constructed $1.2 billion lie was about to be obliterated. The air in the dining room crackled with a volatile mix of fear, disbelief, and the acrid stench of exposed evil. Alistair's initial paralysis gave way to a desperate attempt at damage control. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to recapture his smooth VC persona. "Clara, my God, you're alive. Thank heavens. We searched for days, darling. We thought—" His voice broke theatrically, reaching out a hand. I recoiled slightly, not physically, but with a deliberate, visible shift in my posture, a rejection more powerful than a slap. "Don't touch me, Alistair, and save the performance. You don't need to audition for the jury yet." I gestured to the gift box in the center of the table. "I prepared something special for tonight. A little gift basket, a farewell present, if you will. Please open it." Serena, still wide-eyed with terror, whimpered, "What is it, Clara? What do you want?" "Justice," I replied simply, "and the closure of your fraudulent account. Open the box, Alistair." His hands, which had once signed contracts worth hundreds of millions, were shaking uncontrollably as he tore the black ribbon. He lifted the lid, and the contents were revealed, a stack of paper and a small antique flash drive. I began to narrate the contents, forcing them to look the wreckage of their own making. Inside, you'll find the official, notarized document from the courts. It is a full accounting of all assets placed under the control of Elias Thorne, effective day 8. Your inheritance, Alistair, and your share, Serena, is currently 0. Every dollar is frozen, pending the outcome of a criminal investigation. Your motive? Gone. Alistair looked like he'd been hit by a defibrillator. He snatched up the flash drive. "What is this? What have you done?" "That," I said, a wave of calm washing over me, "is the ultimate evidence. It contains 3 things. First, the complete, unedited audio and video file from the hidden camera in the stateroom and on the deck of the Zenith. Every word you said, every confession, every detail of the plot, including Serena's charming little whisper about the sharks. Second, it holds the complete forensic recovery of all your deleted emails and text messages, confirming your plan was hatched before our wedding. And third, the detailed private investigation file on Alistair's previous wives, the file that shows a clear, undeniable pattern of financial murder. You are not just a one-time killer, Alistair. You are a serial predator. Serena let out a guttural sob and instantly turned on Alistair, a reflex of pure, self-serving survival. You bastard! You told me it was only her. You told me she was the first. Alistair, completely unmasked, his face red with fury and desperation, slammed the flash drive onto the table. You snake! You set us up. You were supposed to be dead. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. I am a software engineer, Alistair, I said, the intellectual distance returning. I anticipate human error. You too were the biggest bugs in my operating system. I then dropped the final hammer, the one that meant immediate action. I reached into my pocket and pressed a small, discreet security alert button, a signal to my team and the authorities outside. The FBI has the flash drive. Marcus Dunn's team is in the next room. And those papers you just saw? They include the signed warrants for your arrest, Alistair Vance, for 3 counts of attempted murder and conspiracy, and for you, Serena Sterling, for 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder and grand larceny. Alistair lunged. It wasn't a tactical move. It was a desperate explosion of animalistic rage. He grabbed a heavy crystal glass from the table, intending to smash it over my head. But Marcus Dunn and his 2 security operatives burst out of the panic room. They were fast, disciplined, and brutal in their efficiency. Alistair was tackled mid-swing, crashing to the ground with a grunt of pain. He struggled, screaming obscenities, the elegant veneer completely shattered, revealing the pathetic, cornered fraud beneath. Serena was huddled under the table, sobbing hysterically, desperately trying to call someone, anyone on her phone. "Don't worry, Serena," I said, looking down at my sister, whose life had just crashed because of her own greed. "The line's open. The police are already on their way in." Just as the flashing lights of the patrol cars illuminated the dining room window, I approached the snarling Alistair, who was now pinned to the floor. "You said I was pathetic," I murmured, leaning in close. "You called me stupid. But my genius wasn't just in the code, Alistair. It was in knowing exactly who you both were and building a system that was smarter than your greed. Game over." The police and FBI flooded the house. The sight of Alistair and Serena being read their rights, handcuffed, and let out of the home they thought they had won, was the sweetest sound of justice I had ever heard. The nightmare was over, but the rebuilding had only just begun. The ghost was home, and the world was about to hear her story. The arrest of Alistair Vance and Serena Sterling didn't just make headlines. It detonated a cultural bomb. The story had every element the media craves: staggering wealth, high society glamour, a luxurious yacht, a dark murder plot, and the miraculous, cinematic return of the victim. "Billionaire CEO rises from the deep to confront killers" was the top story on every news outlet, dominating cable news and generating a social media frenzy that dwarfed my original company acquisition. My team immediately went into full crisis communication mode, though this was less about PR and more about narrative control. The public was hungry for details, and if we didn't provide a factual, compelling account, the vacuum would be filled by speculation and misinformation. Elias Thorne took the lead, delivering a concise, powerful statement that confirmed the arrests were based on irrefutable evidence, including video footage and prior malicious planning. He was careful to frame the narrative. This was not a tragic accident averted. This was a predatory, calculated attempt by people closest to me to steal my life and my legacy. I knew I couldn't remain silent. I chose one major interview, a sit-down with a veteran news anchor known for his integrity, to tell my story. I wanted the public to see the resilience, not just the victimhood. The interview was emotionally draining. I described the childhood dynamic, the initial hope I placed in Alistair, the gradual, sickening realization of the betrayal, and the horrifying final moments on the yacht. I didn't embellish the facts. The truth was shocking enough. They underestimated me, I explained, looking directly into the camera. They saw the successful CEO who was tired and looking for love. They didn't see the woman who clawed her way out of poverty, who coded every line of her own success, and whose brain is fundamentally built to anticipate failure. They were defeated, not by a lawyer or a cop, but by the very thing they tried to steal, my intellect and my will to survive. The humanistic angle resonated deeply with the audience. I spoke about the unique vulnerability that comes with success, the isolation of the newly wealthy, and the need for victims of betrayal, regardless of their financial status, to seek justice. I made it clear that while my money enabled a complex defense, the principle of betrayal knows no income bracket. This narrative, the triumph of the cerebral underdog over the charismatic, greedy predators, turned me from a headline into an icon of resilience. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, fueled by the overwhelming evidence. The video footage of Serena whispering, "Say hello to the sharks," and Alistair's cold smile became the most damning piece of evidence. The recovered, deleted emails were the organizational chart of their conspiracy. And Marcus Dunn's detailed history of Alistair's previous victims added the necessary element of premeditation and serial predation. Alistair's defense was pathetic. He claimed temporary insanity due to financial pressure, attempting to pin all the emotional manipulation on Serena. Serena's defense was the opposite. She was a victim of Alistair's manipulation, driven by a lifetime of insecurity and a desire to finally gain her parents' approval. Neither defense held up against the weight of their own recorded conversation. The trial was a circus. The court of public opinion had already convicted them, but the court of law was methodical and relentless. I attended every day, sitting in the front row, forcing them to look at the ghosts they failed to bury. Alistair's face was a study in arrogance and hatred. Serena's was a portrait of crumbled self-pity, desperately avoiding my gaze. The judge's final pronouncement was a moment of profound, cold satisfaction. Alistair Vance was convicted on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of financial fraud and grand larceny. The judge, citing the pattern of prior crimes, handed down a maximum sentence: 30 years in a federal penitentiary, no parole. His life sentence was effectively a permanent, complete failure. Serena Sterling, due to her lesser role in the physical act but undeniable culpability in the conspiracy and financial fraud, was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. The jury found her guilty of acting as an accessory and co-conspirator driven by malice and greed. As the bailiffs led them away, my journey was finally legally complete. I wasn't just alive, I was justified. I had reclaimed my name, my fortune, and my future. But the real work, the work of mending a heart shattered by the closest people in her life, was only just beginning. The final chapter of the book was written, but the first chapter of my new life was now being drafted. The trial ended not with a burst of celebratory fireworks, but with a deep, cleansing silence. The media circus moved on, seeking its next scandal, but I was left with the residue of my old life, a magnificent, empty house, a massive fortune, and a profound, gaping hole where trust used to be. The first step toward true healing was physical detachment. I couldn't stay in the Malibu estate. Every room was tainted with the ghosts of Alistair's lies and Serena's calculated presence. I sold the house quietly and moved into a chic, high-rise apartment in downtown San Francisco, a place that was sleek, minimalist, and entirely new, with no memory of betrayal attached to its walls. I recognized that my experience, while extreme, was universal in its core theme: the devastation caused by intimate betrayal and financial fraud. My resilience wasn't just for me, it had to be shared. I decided to dedicate a significant portion of my wealth to a cause that was born directly from my pain. I established the Lumina Foundation. Lumina, meaning light, was dedicated to two things. First, providing immediate, discreet legal and psychological aid to victims of financial fraud, particularly those committed by family members or trusted partners. Second, funding research into advanced digital forensics and AI-driven pattern recognition to help law enforcement detect subtle financial crimes early, a direct application of my oralogic expertise. This foundation became my new focus, my new company. It was purpose-driven, built on a foundation of empathy I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't just signing checks. I was leading the charge, sitting in on strategy sessions and sharing my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor who understood the shame, the isolation, and the complex legal maneuverings required to fight back. The work allowed me to transmute the poison of betrayal into a powerful medicine for others. My return to the tech world was cautious but intentional. I couldn't go back to the high-pressure CEO life, but I was too brilliant to simply retire. I decided to become an angel investor, specifically focusing on funding startups led by women, minorities, and founders with non-traditional backgrounds. I knew what it felt like to be dismissed in a room full of male VCs. I knew the bias that could make a brilliant idea invisible. My money became my commitment to correcting those systemic imbalances. I called it conscious capital. I relied heavily on my trusted team. Chloe transitioned from an assistant to the chief operating officer of the Lumina Foundation, her loyalty and efficiency finally rewarded with true ownership. Elias Thorne remained my legal counsel, often pro bono for the Foundation's cases. Maya Singh became my tech partner, using her forensic skills to guide our investments in early-stage cybersecurity firms. We were a family of choice, bound not by blood, but by shared trust and mutual respect, a bond infinitely stronger than the one I had lost. 1 year after the convictions, I faced another challenge: the need for emotional closure. I knew I couldn't move forward if I didn't acknowledge the two most painful chapters, the ocean and Serena. I chartered a small boat, not a yacht, and, accompanied only by Captain Ricardo, who had become a trusted friend of the Foundation, I sailed out to the approximate coordinates where I had been thrown overboard. Standing on the modest deck, I didn't see the terror anymore. I saw the point where my weakness died and my power was born. I tossed a single bouquet of white roses into the waves, not in mourning, but in release. I was formally closing the case of Clara Sterling, victim. 6 months later, I took the hardest step. I visited Serena in state prison. I didn't go out of obligation or familial love. I went for my own peace. The visiting room was sterile, the light harsh. Serena looked pale, her beauty faded by the unflattering uniform and the heavy air of regret. The moment she saw me, she broke down, not with the theatrical tears of the press conference, but with genuine, gut-wrenching sobs. "Clara," she choked out, "I am so sorry. I know sorry isn't enough, but I have to tell you the truth. Alistair, he found me first. He knew I was resentful, and he used it. He convinced me that you had everything, and that I deserved a piece of it. He promised me he'd get my name on the will, and then he'd handle the rest." She confessed everything. The years of silent envy, the willingness to be corrupted, the fear that had kept her silent even after the plan spiraled into murder. I listened to her confession without interruption. When she was finished, I looked her straight in the eye. "Thank you for the truth, Serena. It doesn't change anything, but it provides context." "Can you ever forgive me?" she whispered, her voice raw. I paused, considering the weight of that word. "Forgiveness is a complicated thing, Serena. I don't hate you anymore. Hatred is a waste of my energy, and you're not worth that kind of investment. But you are not my family. You chose Alistair and $1 billion over my life. That choice is permanent. I will never forgive you, and I will never call you sister again." I stood up, leaving her weeping at the table. It wasn't a cruel exit. It was a final boundary, a declaration of self-respect. I walked out of that prison knowing I was truly free, not because she was locked away, but because I had locked away the emotional power she once held over me. Returning from the prison visit, I felt an extraordinary lightness, as if a lifetime of toxic emotional baggage, the competitive rivalry, the feeling of being inadequate, and the ultimate violent betrayal, had been permanently dropped. The confrontation with Serena wasn't about her redemption. It was the final confirmation of my own. I had faced the darkness in my past and walked away, choosing light. My next focus was on building a public legacy that stood in stark opposition to the narrative of greed and entitlement that defined Alistair and Serena. I decided to write a memoir. The process of writing was agonizingly therapeutic. I didn't hire a ghostwriter. I wrote every single word myself, pouring the truth onto the page. The book, titled After the Fall, Rebuilding When Your Foundation Crumbles, wasn't a revenge fantasy. It was a handbook for resilience. I detailed the process of setting up Protocol Chimera, the calculated risk of swallowing the sedative, and the brutal 18 hours in the Pacific. I used my technologist's mindset to structure the book, treating the entire event as a system failure that needed to be debugged, documented, and rebuilt with stronger code. The book became an instant bestseller, resonating with a massive audience, especially women and older readers who saw their own smaller betrayals and losses reflected in my extreme ordeal. It was the humanistic angle that truly connected. The book didn't just talk about money. It talked about the importance of chosen family, conscious trust, and the wisdom gained only through deep suffering. I shared my journey of learning to trust again, starting small with Chloe, Elias, and Maya, and then expanding that circle slowly, deliberately. I began touring, speaking not to tech conferences, but to community centers and senior groups. I told them, trust is not something you give blindly. It's something you earn and test over time. My greatest failure was assuming love meant immunity from scrutiny. My greatest success was realizing that real trust is built on shared values and transparency, not sentimentality. These talks turned the book into a movement, providing a tangible roadmap for recovery. The Lumina Foundation flourished. My personal story attracted major donors who believed in the mission. We started funding therapy for victims, offering pro bono legal counsel, and in one instance, helping a woman recover her retirement savings that her stepson had secretly liquidated. This was my life now. Less about coding the future of AI and more about coding the future of human safety and justice. My personal life, though private, became deeply fulfilling. I developed a profound, platonic friendship with Captain Ricardo and Benito. They became my surrogate family. I bought them a newer, safer trawler, which they named the Clara, and in return they taught me to appreciate the simpler rhythms of life. The rhythm of the tide, the quiet satisfaction of a morning catch, the peace of a life lived honestly. Benito, now studying engineering, often consulted me on his projects, and I became his unofficial mentor. The wisdom I gained from the ordeal, my post-traumatic growth, was my most valuable asset. I learned that my true wealth was not the $1.2 billion, but the unshakable certainty of my own worth, independent of any external validation, whether it came from a parent's approval or a husband's love. I learned that betrayal, while devastating, is ultimately a failure of the perpetrator, not the victim. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Elias Thorne. It was the final, official communication regarding Alistair. Alistair had filed an appeal claiming ineffective counsel, which was summarily denied. The letter contained a handwritten note from Elias. "It's done, Clara. Every avenue is closed. He is fully contained." I read the note and simply tossed it into the recycling bin. Alistair was a problem solved, a system debugged, and he no longer occupied any space in my architecture. I looked out over the San Francisco Bay from my apartment, the water sparkling in the afternoon light. It was a beautiful, familiar sight, a world away from the dark abyss of the Pacific. I was still a young woman, but I felt the deep, steady wisdom of someone who had faced death and chosen life, a wisdom that resonated with the older demographic I now spoke to. I had earned the right to say, "I survived, I rebuilt, and I am stronger than the combined evil of my past." I had transformed the venom of envy into the fuel for my new purpose. The story was no longer about the fall. It was entirely about the ascent. Years passed, bringing with them a quiet, profound contentment I had never experienced in the dizzying rush of my first career. My life was defined by purpose, not profit. The Lumina Foundation was thriving, having helped dozens of people regain their footing after the kind of catastrophic betrayal that strips away not just money, but dignity. I never remarried, nor did I rush back into serious dating. That initial period of recovery required a dedication to self that was fiercely protective. I allowed myself to date only when I could look at a person and genuinely believe they saw Clara, the resilient woman of substance, and not Clara Sterling, the billionaire. This conscious trust, earned, tested, and never given blindly, was the enduring lesson of Alistair and Serena. It created stronger, more authentic connections than I had ever known before. My relationship with my biological family remained permanently altered. My parents, heartbroken and ashamed by Serena's actions, eventually reached out. They were confused, hurt, and desperate for reconciliation. I met with them in a neutral space. They didn't apologize for their favoritism, but they apologized for their failure to see Serena's character and for their failure to protect me. We didn't understand the depth of her resentment. "Clara," my mother whispered, her voice fragile, "and we didn't understand your world. We realize now we took your quiet strength for granted." It wasn't a full repair, but it was a step toward human connection. I established a cordial, but distant, relationship with them. They were allowed back into my life, but never into my core circle of trust. That space was reserved for Chloe, Elias, Maya, and the Rivera family, my chosen tribe. One of the most poignant moments came during a speaking engagement in a small Midwestern town. An older gentleman approached me, his eyes wet with tears. "My daughter lost everything in a similar scheme," he told me, clutching my book. She was ashamed, felt foolish. She felt she was too old to start over. Your story, the part where you say, the only certainty is our capacity to begin again, that saved her. It showed her that resilience isn't just for the young. That encounter cemented my mission. My story, once a private horror, had become public utility, a tool for empowerment. I decided to close the final psychological loop with one last visit to the place of my attempted demise. I chartered a private plane this time and flew to the small Mexican village where Captain Ricardo and Benito lived. I walked the quiet beach at dawn, the sound of the gentle waves washing away the last remnants of the past. I sat with Captain Ricardo on the dock, watching the Clara bob gently in the morning light. "You know, Clara," he said, puffing on his pipe, "that night on the ocean I told Benito we were rescuing a very lucky woman. But later I realized something better. The ocean didn't let you drown, not because you were lucky, but because you had a strength of purpose it couldn't consume. The water carried you to your next chapter. You were too strong to die there." His words resonated deeply. The vast water that had nearly claimed me had, instead, carried me to a second chance, to a new, better version of myself. It was the catalyst for my truest life. I realized that life offers no guarantees against betrayal or loss. The people we trust may reveal themselves as strangers. The foundations we thought solid may dissolve beneath our feet. The only certainty we possess is our inherent human capacity to start again, to rebuild something new, something stronger, out of whatever wreckage remains. Today, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, I see a landscape defined by innovation. But I understand that the greatest innovations aren't in the code. They are in the human heart. I am Clara Sterling, 42 years old, financially secure, emotionally whole, and the proud founder of the Lumina Foundation. I am a survivor, an architect, and a friend. And the best part, I am the undisputed captain of my own ship, navigating by the stars I chose myself. I found my true, profound power not in becoming a billionaire, but in surviving the fall. The years that followed the launch of After the Fall were not just about success. They were about integrating the trauma, transforming the horror into quiet, sustainable wisdom. I learned that true resilience isn't the absence of scars, but the ability to use those scars as navigational tools. The story of my survival wasn't a finished book. It was an open source guide for others. My commitment to conscious capital continued to define my professional identity. I hosted annual mentorship retreats at my apartment, gathering dozens of brilliant young founders, mostly women and minorities, who struggled to gain traction in the overwhelmingly male-dominated venture world. I taught them not just about valuation and exit strategies, but about trust protocols, how to vet partners, how to structure boards for accountability, and how to spot the red flags of character assassination and financial manipulation. My unique expertise in emotional AI, the very core of Oralogic, was now used to protect, not just profit. A major milestone arrived on the 5-year anniversary of the arrests. The Lumina Foundation announced a partnership with a major university to establish the Clara Sterling Institute for Ethics in Finance. It was a massive endowment dedicated to teaching business students about the ethical hazards of greed, using my entire case from Alastair's history to Serena's betrayal as a mandatory case study. It was the ultimate academic form of justice, ensuring that their actions would serve as a permanent cautionary tale. I even allowed myself moments of quiet or joy. I started painting again, abstract, vibrant pieces that reflected the chaos and the subsequent clarity of my life. I adopted a rescue dog, a goofy golden retriever mix named Sentinel, who demanded simple, unconditional love and trust, forcing me to practice those emotions without fear of reprisal. The subject of Serena occasionally surfaced, usually through a cryptic message from my mother about her attempts at rehabilitation. I never responded, maintaining the strong boundary I had set. My final act concerning my sister was one of detached compassion. I established a trust fund that would pay for her college education, entirely managed by the Lumina Foundation. Upon her release, provided she met stringent ethical and psychological requirements. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, but an act of responsible stewardship, ensuring she wouldn't be forced back into the cycle of desperation and crime. A final, pragmatic solution to a deeply flawed program. Alistair Vance, I heard, was exactly where he belonged, fighting appeals in prison, utterly consumed by his failures. He was a non-entity, a footnote to my success. The man who sought to erase my life had only managed to erase his own. Looking back, the story had all the elements of a dark tragedy, but it ultimately became a testament to the human spirit's ability to rewrite its own script. The most valuable lesson I carried forward was the importance of vulnerability paired with wisdom. I was no longer afraid of love or commitment, but I was wise enough to know that I deserved a partner in business and in life who met my integrity, not who sought to exploit my wealth. Today, as I film this final segment from the deck of a sailing boat, a modest vessel, far from the extravagance of the zenith, I feel complete. The sun is warm, the wind is fair, and I am surrounded by my chosen family. Chloe and her husband, Benito, now a successful structural engineer, and Captain Ricardo, who is regaling us all with tales of the sea. I turn the camera outward toward the magnificent blue of the ocean. The sea is still vast, I say, my voice steady and clear. It still represents risk, danger, and the unknown. But when I look at it now, I see it differently than I once did. I don't see the grave they intended for me. I see the horizon. And the horizon, for a survivor, is always a promise. Life is about building. Alistair built his life on lies. He got 30 years. Serena built hers on envy. She got 18 years. I built mine on a strong foundation of code. And when that failed, I built a stronger one on conscious trust and unbreakable purpose. If you've been betrayed, if your foundation has crumbled, please know this: the time for hiding is over. Your greatest power is revealed only after you have been broken. Go build. I turn off the camera, take a deep breath of the sea air, and look at my family. The silence is profound, the peace absolute. I am Clara Sterling, and my best code is still being written. Thanks for listening my story.